Are you sure you want to know? This is me going to see the premiere of No Way Home. What was my reaction to the movie? You're about to find out. First of all, I just want to say that this is a spoiler-filled review, so if you haven't seen the movie and or don't want it spoiled for you, turn back now. Secondly, I don't want any negative thoughts I have on the movie to have a negative impact on anyone's opinion or viewing experience of the movie. You should enjoy it the way you want to enjoy it, and if you think any criticism will hurt that experience, I also suggest not listening to this review. First things first, I want everyone, including myself, to look at this movie simply from a film standpoint without letting any fan service or nostalgia blind you from how good the film really is. That being said, it was still a good movie. I'll start by talking about what I liked about the movie, which is the majority of it. From a narrative standpoint, this is the most emotional of the Home trilogy. It really improves the character of Peter Parker / Spider-Man in ways that the previous two films didn't. And while I think the first two films were more cohesive as stories on their own, this one packed the most punch of the three thanks to its emotional depth. This movie saw Peter face real consequences, and the result is a Spider-Man that people have been waiting for with Tom Holland's movies. I was also worried that Doctor Strange would play somewhat of a father figure role in this film like Iron Man did before him, overshadowing Peter's individual ability to grow and shine as Spider-Man. This wasn't the case, however, as Doctor Strange's involvement in the plot was important, but not overdone to the point where he oversaw everything, and it worked fantastically. And of course I have to talk about the returning Spider-Man. Yes, the two returning, especially Tobey Maguire, was an exhilarating experience. The important part, however, is that the dynamic between these three Spider-Men was wonderful. My favorite moments in the entire movie were the three Spider-Men shooting the shit and learning about each other. Not only were their interactions entertaining and hilarious, but also felt like each time we got to witness this dynamic, we were able to breathe for the first time in the movie. In a story contested with plot point after plot point and obstacle after obstacle, these moments let me just sit, relax, and enjoy the moment. The fight scenes were all incredibly choreographed and exhilarating to watch. Each fight was intense while also feeling like a blast from the past. My favorite being the first fight with the Green Goblin in the apartment building. Personally, I like this fight the best because it felt the most realistic and grounded, as opposed to the other fights which were mostly CGI. When I watch a superhero fight, I'd rather be watching the actual characters in action rather than a video game cutscene, and even though the CGI isn't necessarily bad and does a fine job at telling the story, I'm just personally more of a sucker for the craft of live action shots. The first Goblin fight had a lot of that, and it felt like I was watching Spidey fight the Goblin in the first Raimi film all over again. I definitely would have liked to see more of Tobey's real suit in action as opposed to CGI Tobey. Seeing Tobey's Spider-Man in action felt like I had been watching the long-awaited Spider-Man 4, especially when he was fighting the Amazing Spider-Man's Lizard, which is somewhat of a treat to fans who were originally looking forward to Tobey fighting the Lizard in what would have been the upcoming Spider-Man 4 or 5. I definitely would have liked to see him fighting the Green Goblin more than he did, as he spent most of his time fighting the Lizard, but that's just me asking for more fan service. There was a lot of fan service that was just priceless. Whether it be from characters returning or them just saying a signature line from a previous film or a meme such as, "I'm something of a scientist myself," or "my back." A lot of it was good fun, even if I had my face in my palm after hearing some of those lines. Also, just seeing all three Spider-Men swinging together was gorgeous. I also really liked that Charlie Cox returned as Daredevil in the film as well, although his inclusion was a lot smaller than I would have preferred, and he's simply there to get a kick out of fans with no real addition to the overarching plot of the film. We do have to talk about the consequences of fan service, and there was a lot of it. If you saw this movie without any previous knowledge of other Spider-Man franchises or movies, frankly, this movie would suck. There's so much meta shit that is expected to explain itself thanks to everything that came before it, but how well will that hold up in 20 to 30 years' time when people look back on this movie? Without the fresh sense of excitement regarding this movie and all the franchises it involves, would people really still see this movie as a crowning achievement or just another action flick? Only time can really tell the answer to that, but this begs the question of what really makes a good movie. Tom Holland and others involved in the film promoted it as the best Spider-Man movie ever made, and I just think that's not plausible at all. I feel like a movie that is well written into a single passage like Spider-Man 1 or 2 or Into the Spider-Verse have to be better than No Way Home, because these movies are complete. No Way Home is not a complete film without the other films to back it up. How well will that hold up when the nostalgia wears off, and that's something only time can tell. Something I did like about all the included characters and villains is that even though they are previously established characters that don't necessarily need the character building given the context, they each were still given a good amount of time to shine in their respective roles, especially Willem Dafoe, Alfred Molina, and Jamie Foxx. Each villain surprisingly had a lot of room to breathe and were enjoyable to watch, unlike some other Spider-Man films that crammed a bunch of villains in. And one big thing I was worried about going into this film was how they would treat the returning characters as far as their previous development had already led them. I was especially worried about Doc Ock, as his villain arc is among the best I've ever seen in a superhero movie, and I was really curious as to how they would bring him back without ruining his character. Because the spell brings people back that want to kill Peter Parker, but he doesn't know who Peter Parker is until the very end of the movie when he reveals his identity before him, right before he convinces him not to destroy the world or whatever. They did a good job at explaining this by saying that Doc Ock essentially gets teleported the moment he wraps his claw around Peter's throat, which is the moment right before he gets Doc Ock to change his mind. So I'm glad they did that without completely ruining his character. I also really like that when the Sandman is first introduced, he decides to help Peter as opposed to attacking him. This also makes a lot of sense regarding the context of his character. It was a little strange, however, that he was in his sand form the entire movie as opposed to going into his human form, which he has shown that he can do multiple times in Spider-Man 3. And also, when they get fixed and put back in their universes, where essentially do they get put back? Do they get put back to the exact moment from when they were teleported? How does that affect the timeline in these other universes? But when a character is really essential to the plot, I expect a lot of character development packed into the movie they're affecting. And there were some characters that I felt didn't work that great, as they felt more like a plot device than an actual character. The lesser of these being J. Jonah Jameson, as instead of getting to know the character like we did in the Raimi movies, he just kind of acted as a presence that reminded people who Spider-Man was. This is kind of excusable, however, as his character isn't really that important throughout the plot other than what he started. The real offender here is Aunt May. This movie really lacked any genuine development of Aunt May, certainly not enough for me to feel bad about her death. She rarely showed up in the film, and when she did, she merely acted as a plot device to try to get Peter to do the right thing. It feels kind of forced and out of nowhere, as May is simply saying everything she does to get some sort of emotional reaction out of the audience. A character that I think wasn't bad overall but had some questionable plot choices was Ned. I'm sorry, but Ned just inherently having the immense power of bringing in people from other universes is some Mary Sue Deus Ex Machina shit. If something similar happened in a franchise like Star Wars, people would lose their minds. Pretty much every criticism I've had up to this point has been excusable to an extent, but my biggest problem with this movie was the ending, as the spell that Doctor Strange casted made everything extremely convoluted. So everything that previously happened exactly the same, but nobody questions how they got where they were? Do you really expect me to just accept that Happy knew Aunt May through Spider-Man, but never questions the fact that he has no idea who Spider-Man is or what his relationship with May is? Ned and MJ never question how they became friends? If their memory was altered to where someone else fills those gaps, who the hell would it even be? Now everyone who has ever interacted with Peter Parker has a huge gap in their memory, and they never beg to question it. This is a major hole the writers have dug, and I think it's going to take some retconning in the future to fix some inconsistencies. And you can say, oh, Billy, you're overthinking it. It's just magic. Yes, I understand that magic exists in this universe, and it is what caused this dilemma. But that doesn't fix the fact that from a writing standpoint, it creates a lot of problems. When I expressed some of these opinions on a few Marvel-themed subreddits, I was met with some backlash saying, it's just magic, that's how magic works. One person even went as far as saying that if I have a problem with the plot choice, then I have a problem with everyone who has Alzheimer's. It's not how they got to where they are that I'm concerned about. It's the fact that now that they are where they are, it doesn't make any sense for any of them to question their past. Everyone in the Marvel universe who knew Peter, which due to the plot of No Way Home is a lot of people, now has a giant hole in their memory and nobody begs to question it. Just because they forgot who Peter was doesn't mean they necessarily not care that they can't remember how they got to where they are. If someone asks Happy what Spider-Man's relationship with Aunt May was, what would he even say? Gee, I never really thought of that. All this being said, and as much as I have a problem with the spell, it does provide a good segue to the future Tom Holland Spider-Man trilogy, as it separates him from the MCU characters that plagued the first trilogy and gives him time to shine on his own, giving people the Spider-Man movie that they've been waiting for. I also think that the post-credit scene was very smart, as it sets up for Venom to appear in the MCU while also getting rid of the goofiness of Tom Hardy's version of the character. Overall, I still very much enjoyed this film, although it was certainly flawed. I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10.